What if the person you were convinced was completely out of your league eventually became your wife? What if you lost her, watched other people enter both of your lives, failed to reconcile, watched friendships fall apart, faced family pressure, and reached a point where the entire situation looked completely impossible? And yet somehow, years later, you were standing at your wedding with the exact person you once thought you could never have. This is not a story about manifesting a text overnight. It is not a story about imagining for 3 nights and suddenly getting everything you want. This is a story about 5 years of assumptions, self-sabotage, breakups, failed reconciliation, third parties, impossible circumstances, and ultimately learning what it really means to live in the end. And by the time you hear what happened, you might look at the way you think about your own specific person completely differently. Welcome back to Real Life Manifestations, where we share real manifestation success stories and the lessons behind them so you can see what the law of assumption can actually look like in someone's life. Today's story was originally shared as a personal success story, and the names and a few identifying details have been changed for privacy, but the important events happened exactly as described. And I want you to listen to this one all the way through, because the most important part of this story isn't simply that this man eventually married the woman he wanted. The most important part is what happened inside him between the first time he imagined becoming her boyfriend and the moment he finally imagined himself as her husband. The story began in early 2019, when he was entering his 20s. At that point in his life, he was painfully insecure. He had never had a girlfriend, had almost no romantic experience, and genuinely had no idea how to approach women or get into a relationship. Around his closest friends, he could be funny and completely normal, but outside that small circle, he was extremely shy. In fact, he was so shy that he was even afraid to create an Instagram account. His friends would tell him to make one, but he would think that he didn't have enough friends, enough pictures, or enough followers. He worried that people would look at his profile and think he wasn't popular. And that should tell you everything you need to know about the self-concept he was carrying at the time. His family had been involved for most of his life with an Indian faith-based Sunday school organization. He grew up taking classes there, attending summer programs, participating in a faith-based choir, volunteering, and spending most Sundays surrounded by the same community. It was a huge part of his upbringing, and most of his real friendships came from that organization. As the younger members entered their late teens and early 20s, the leadership wanted them to start taking on more responsibility. A group of around 10 or 15 young people began organizing camps, running events, teaching younger students, and learning how to manage parts of the organization themselves. Because they were constantly working together, many of them became much closer. And that was where he really got to know the woman who would eventually become his wife. For privacy, he calls her Ashley. And according to him, Ashley was easily the most beautiful woman he had ever met in real life. He describes her as absolutely stunning. She had modeled when she was younger, she was extremely popular, she had a lot of friends, and she carried herself with a level of confidence that he simply didn't have. But it wasn't only her appearance. She was kind, funny, intelligent, and naturally good with people. She also had previous relationship experience, which intimidated him even more. Meanwhile, he had never even properly asked a girl out on a date. In his mind, Ashley was completely out of his league. He developed a huge crush on her, but he never admitted it. He told himself that saying anything would ruin their friendship, but the truth was much simpler. He was terrified of rejection. Around this same time, 2 of their mutual friends, whom he calls Sherry and Sean, were interested in each other. Sean was one of his close friends, and he helped push the 2 of them together. He even jokingly predicted the exact day they would start dating, and somehow, that was the exact day it happened. Because he had helped Sherry and Sean get together, Sherry became especially friendly with him. She felt that he had done something important for her and wanted to return the favor by helping him get into a relationship. And the obvious person she had in mind was her best friend Ashley. Sherry gave him several openings. First, she casually suggested that Ashley and he would make a good couple. He immediately denied being interested. It sounds ridiculous, especially because he thought about Ashley constantly, but he was genuinely that afraid to put himself out there. Internally, he wanted Ashley more than anyone. Externally, he acted as though there was absolutely nothing there. Then, around February 2019, something happened that would change the entire direction of his life. YouTube recommended him a Joseph Alive video about manifesting a desired person. Before that, he had already been reading general law of attraction material and listening to teachers such as Abraham Hicks. He understood that mindset and positivity mattered, but he didn't have a clear framework for deliberately creating a specific result. That video introduced him to Neville Goddard. Something about Neville's teaching immediately clicked. Neville wasn't telling him to hope, beg, wait, or convince the universe that he deserved something. He was learning that imagination creates reality, and that he could enter a relaxed, sleepy state. Imagine a short scene implying that his desire had already been fulfilled. Give that scene the tones of reality, experience it as happening now, and then allow a bridge of incidents to lead toward the actualization of that scene. So he decided to test it with Ashley. His scene was incredibly simple. He imagined sitting across from Sherry at a Panera Bread. He could feel the table beneath him. He could see Sherry's facial expression, what she was wearing, and the space around them. And in the scene, Sherry looked at him and said, "I'm so glad you're dating Ashley." He repeated that scene for several nights. He was completely new to Neville, so he wasn't doing everything perfectly, but he tried to experience the scene as vividly as possible and fall asleep while looping it. A few days later, Sherry wrote in their group chat that she had dreamed about him dating someone. She didn't directly say Ashley's name, but from the context, it seemed obvious that she was implying Ashley. He interpreted that as the first sign that his imaginal act had impressed itself. Then Ashley began talking to him more. She asked for his Snapchat. Before that, they rarely communicated outside of volunteering, but suddenly she was messaging him and showing more interest. Their friendship became noticeably closer. But there was still a major problem. He wanted the entire relationship handed to him on a silver platter without having to face any fear. He wanted Ashley to somehow become his girlfriend without him having to admit that he liked her, ask her out, risk rejection, or change the way he saw himself. He wanted the result while remaining the same person who felt unworthy of receiving it. By fall 2019, Sherry wasn't simply hinting anymore. She was actively creating opportunities for Ashley and him to spend time together. In October, their friends planned a surprise birthday party for Ashley. Sherry and the others asked him to distract Ashley for several hours while they prepared everything at her house. So he took Ashley to the mall, and they spent most of the day together. They walked around, talked, got food, and enjoyed themselves. It was basically a date, even though neither of them called it that. Looking back, the entire setup was obvious. His friends trusted him to spend several hours alone with Ashley because they were trying to bring them closer. Ashley was comfortable going out alone with him. Sherry had already suggested that they should date, yet he still refused to make a move or tell anyone how he felt. Over the next few months, Ashley herself gave him even more openings. She started asking him to get lunch with her and hang out one-on-one. They went to malls, restaurants, and other places together. They were essentially dates, but because neither of them formally called them dates, he could continue hiding behind the idea that they were just friends. Then, during the winter college quarter around the end of 2019 and beginning of 2020, he changed one of his classes because the original time was inconvenient and way too early for him. And when he walked into his new class, there she was. Ashley was in the exact class he had transferred into. Since they lived near each other, attended the same college, and had similar schedules, Ashley suggested that they simply carpool together. Suddenly, they were spending nearly an hour alone in the car together almost every day. Sometimes they would get food after class. Sometimes they would go shopping. They talked, joked around, and became extremely close. Looking back, the bridge was unfolding almost perfectly. Sherry suggested Ashley and he should date. She asked whether he liked her. She even had a dream that they were dating. She arranged for him to take Ashley out alone on her birthday. Ashley began inviting him to lunch and asking him to hang out. Ashley ended up in the exact class he transferred into and even suggested that they carpool to college together. He was being given opening after opening, and he still couldn't admit how he felt. He jokes about it now, calling it lame, but there was something much deeper happening. The bridge was unfolding, but he was still occupying the identity of someone who believed he couldn't have her. He wanted the result while remaining the same person who felt unworthy of it. By the end of spring 2020, he started feeling as though Ashley was becoming more distant. He panicked. He thought he had waited too long. The anxiety kicked in hard. He worried that she had become tired of waiting for him to say something and was moving on. So he returned to the original scene of Sherry saying, "I'm so glad you're dating Ashley." This time, he repeated it much more intensely and vividly. A few weeks later, around the beginning of summer 2020, everyone was at Sean's graduation party. At one point, Sherry and he were hiding together during a group game of hide-and-seek. While they were alone, she confronted him directly. She asked whether he liked Ashley and whether he wanted to date her. For the first time, he admitted the truth. Yes. Sherry became extremely excited. They were practically jumping around together. She told him Ashley liked him too and that he needed to ask her out. Later that day, he texted Ashley and asked her on a date. And to his absolute delight, she immediately agreed. He was elated. He was so happy that he genuinely felt like magic was occurring in his life. It was a crazy feeling. He planned an entire day for them. They went kayaking, rode bikes, walked near the water, and got food. At the end of the date, he finally told her how much he liked her. He was nervous while saying it, but she told him she wanted to see him again. On their next date, during the first part of July 2020, he took her to dinner and asked her to become his girlfriend. She said yes. The exact scene he had imagined came true. Sherry was thrilled that Ashley and he were dating. Their friends knew. They told their parents, which was a major step because they both came from traditional Indian families where dating wasn't necessarily something they casually discussed. Their families had also known one another through the community for many years. He thought he had done it. He thought he had manifested the woman he was going to marry. But he had only imagined becoming her boyfriend. He had not imagined becoming the man capable of sustaining that relationship. And that distinction was about to become painfully clear. Once Ashley and he officially started dating, all of his insecurity came rushing to the surface. He had no idea how to be in a relationship. He didn't know when to hold her hand, whether he should kiss her, how to lead a date, or how to make her feel safe and wanted. Even holding her hand made him so nervous that his palms would sweat. She could feel that energy. He wasn't living as someone who naturally felt loved by her. He was living as someone who couldn't believe she had chosen him and expected to lose her at any moment. During the relationship, Ashley gave him access to some of her social media accounts. He made the mistake of reading old conversations from before they were together. He openly admits now that it was a huge mistake and completely unacceptable. She wasn't cheating on him. These were old messages and had nothing to do with their current relationship. But he saw details from her past that made him even more insecure and intimidated. He knows now that he should never have invaded her privacy, and he isn't proud of it. Instead of feeling secure in the relationship he had wanted for so long, he became even more convinced that he wasn't enough. After about 2 months of dating, around September 2020, Ashley told him that she liked him but didn't know whether she could fall in love with him. She said she was unsure whether the relationship would work. The moment she said that, he spiraled. He accepted her uncertainty as a final verdict. Within days, they broke up. Complete self-sabotage. He was devastated. It was his first relationship. He had spent more than a year wanting her. He had finally received the exact thing he had imagined, only to watch it fall apart almost immediately. But the breakup gave him a realization that changed his life. His scene had actually worked. The law worked. He had imagined Sherry telling him she was happy Ashley and he were dating, and he received precisely that experience. But that was all the scene implied. It didn't imply that they were married. It didn't imply emotional security. It didn't imply lifelong commitment. It didn't imply deep mutual love. And it certainly didn't imply that he had become a confident husband. It only implied that they were dating. And that's exactly what he got. The law hadn't failed him. He had imagined a narrow event, while still identifying as an insecure man who believed he couldn't keep the woman he wanted. That was the moment he decided to stop casually consuming manifestation content and start studying Neville directly. After the breakup, he bought Neville's books and began reading his lectures. Eventually, he read hundreds of them. He wanted to understand the foundation of Neville's teaching rather than simply collect random techniques from other people. He studied states, assumption, revision, inner conversations, living in the end, the Sabbath, and Neville's teaching that human imagination is the creative power of God within us. But the biggest realization for him was personal responsibility for his experiences. As long as he blamed Ashley, her past, other men, his lack of experience, time, or external circumstances, he remained a victim of those things. Neville's teaching forced him to look at his own assumptions, self-concept, inner conversations, and habitual expectations. He began to understand that he wasn't only manifesting during SATs. He was always creating from the state he occupied. The insecure man who imagined becoming Ashley's boyfriend received his scene, but that same insecure man continued creating from insecurity throughout the relationship. He had to change the person doing the imagining. So he began deliberately working on his self-concept. He imagined friends commenting on how confident and outgoing he had become. He practiced seeing himself as attractive, secure, socially comfortable, and capable of leading a relationship. It didn't transform him overnight, but over time, he became a noticeably different person. During this period, he also made another serious mistake. He didn't realize he still had access to some of Ashley's social media accounts after the breakup, and he checked them when he absolutely should not have. He saw messages from other men and what appeared to be pictures from a date. It hurt badly, really badly. But eventually, he recognized that checking her accounts was both wrong and destructive. It violated her privacy, kept him focused on circumstances he didn't want, and repeatedly pushed him back into the state of being rejected. So he stopped. He decided that even if there were other people in the picture, he wouldn't obsess over them. He would focus on the end he wanted and continue changing himself. Throughout 2021, he also tested the law with other specific people and relationships. In one case, an extremely attractive woman began working around his family's business. He imagined a scene of them together. Within a short period, they began talking, started dating, and became physically involved. Eventually, he realized he didn't love her and ended the relationship. He regrets allowing it to progress when his heart was elsewhere, but the experience showed him that he was no longer the person who believed attractive women were inaccessible to him. Another time, he saw a photograph of a woman who had modeled and represented his state in a major national competition. He had never met her. He imagined his friends reacting with disbelief that he had gotten together with her. Within a couple of weeks, he unexpectedly met her. The next day, she messaged him, and eventually they had a fun fling. There were other manifestations as well, including many unrelated to relationships. He started building what he thought of as a bank of evidence. Whenever doubt appeared, he could look back at experiences he had imagined before they happened and remind himself that imagination had repeatedly preceded the result. But no matter who entered his life, his feelings for Ashley never disappeared. He wasn't actively manifesting something specific with her at that point. Instead, he was on a huge roll of successful manifestations, and his inner conviction had become massive. He felt that many things he thought of and many things he thought from would literally just occur in his life. Then, on New Year's Eve, he fell asleep daydreaming about Ashley and receiving messages from her. And on January 1, 2022, their organization held its usual New Year's event. During the event, Ashley pointed out that they were wearing matching colors. She also went out of her way to speak to him more than she had in a very long time. Afterward, she began sending him Snapchats every day. By then, he had changed considerably. Other people saw him as more confident and social. He knew how to plan dates, speak to women, and express interest. But when it came to Ashley, the old version of him began returning. The breakup still carried emotional pain that he hadn't fully processed. He wanted her back, but he was afraid to discuss what had happened. Once again, he secretly hoped she would somehow make everything effortless for him. After they had been speaking on Sundays again and Snapchatting daily for about 2 months, Ashley simply asked him to lunch. He went into that meeting excited because it felt like the bridge was beginning again. He assumed they would hang out several times and gradually find their way back into a relationship, kind of like last time. Instead, she brought up the breakup herself. She told him she had made a mistake. She said she had continued thinking about him, regretted hurting him, and believed they had actually been right for each other. She wanted to try again. Amazing, right? This was the exact opportunity he had wanted for years. And he froze. The memory of her saying the relationship would never work came rushing back. He became emotional and choked up crying. Instead of telling her that he wanted her to, he told her he didn't know whether they could make it work. He wasn't consciously trying to reject her. He was reacting to the pain he still associated with their relationship. But from her perspective, she had made herself vulnerable and he had said no. She was hurt. Her entire demeanor changed. Within minutes, she ended the lunch and left. He sat there afterward wondering how he had somehow managed to ruin another perfect opportunity. He messaged her and asked to meet again because he wanted to explain himself. She was reluctant, but eventually agreed. They met briefly in her car at a park. This was still during the period when COVID precautions were common, and she kept a mask on while they spoke. But emotionally, it also felt like another wall between them. She was distant and guarded. He had planned to tell her that he still loved her and wanted to rebuild the relationship, but her coldness affected him. She even said she could never see them being together. He lost his nerve. He never communicated everything he had intended to say. And they became distant again. That experience taught him something incredibly important. Self-concept isn't always completely general. He had become confident around other women, but he still held a very specific identity in relation to Ashley. With her, he returned to being the insecure man who expected rejection and believed the relationship could never be repaired. For the rest of 2022, he continued living his life and dating other people. His family had also begun discussing marriage with him more seriously because he was now in his mid-20s. That pressure made the situation feel even more urgent. He worried that Ashley could be introduced to someone else and become engaged before he ever had a chance to fix things between them. He continued imagining different things. Whenever Ashley came into his thoughts, he was often in a conflicted state. On one side, he imagined good things with her. On the other, he imagined the pain of the past, his failures, and his self-concept of lack. Then, in early 2023, Ashley started showing signs of interest again. She was warmer toward him at community events. He would catch her looking at him or finding reasons to join conversations he was having. Around March 2023, he started thinking seriously about creating a proper scene for their future. Unfortunately, their friend group at the community center had a major falling out. There was drama involving a prank. Several people became upset with one another, and the group fractured. Because Ashley was especially close to Sherry and Sean, who were upset with him and a few others, she became distant again. Ugh. It felt as though the natural bridge between them had completely collapsed. Around the same time, another beautiful woman whom he had previously imagined entered his life. She was very interested in him, and they dated for most of 2023. But by the end of that year, he had to be honest with himself. He was still in love with Ashley, and continuing the relationship was unfair to the woman he was dating. So he ended it. By the beginning of 2024, the circumstances with Ashley looked worse than they ever had. They had broken up in 2020. They had failed to reconcile in 2022. Their friend group had fractured in 2023. Multiple other people had entered both of their lives. His parents weren't heavily pressuring him, but but he felt older and felt the pressure of getting married. He didn't even know Ashley's relationship status. And on top of all that, Ashley herself had literally told him on 2 separate occasions by that point that she could never be with him. Even after everything he had studied and everything he had manifested, he still couldn't logically understand how this particular situation could possibly be repaired. It genuinely felt impossible. But regardless, he basically said, "Fuck that, I still know anything is possible." And that was when he finally made the biggest change in his manifestation approach. At the beginning of 2024, he decided he would no longer imagine texts, signs, conversations, dates, or casual daydreams of being together. Those were all middle events. He knew what he actually wanted. He wanted to be happily married to Ashley. And he wanted their group friendships restored so that everyone could remain close and grow older together. So he created a scene set 20 years in the future. In his imagination, he was sitting in Sherry and Sean's basement, where their group had often spent time together. He felt the couch underneath him and saw the room around him. Sherry looked at him with excitement and said something like, "I can't believe you and Ashley have been happily married for 20 years. You two are the definition of a true happy, healthy love. I'm so happy for you." He didn't watch himself from a distance. He experienced the scene in first person. He heard her voice. He felt the couch. He saw the room. And he accepted that he was already the man who had been married to Ashley for decades and was celebrating an anniversary. That scene implied far more than a wedding. It implied a lasting marriage, restored friendships, emotional security, maturity, years of shared history. He assumed that state in imagination, night after night. And then the bridge began moving. Within a few weeks, Sherry unexpectedly became friendly with him again. They resolved the tension between them and began rebuilding their friendship. Then she asked whether he was single. He said yes. She didn't explain exactly why she wanted to know, but she said she hoped things worked out for him. Around the same period, Ashley began appearing at Sunday school more often and acting warmer toward him. He noticed the movement. But this time, he didn't chase every sign. He didn't try to force the bridge. He remained focused on the end. Then came June 2024. He came home after a long day at work. He was tired. He wasn't thinking about Ashley. He wasn't thinking about manifestation. His mom called him into the living room and asked him to sit down. Then she asked him a question that completely shocked him. "Do you still like Ashley?" He couldn't believe she was asking. He and his mom hadn't seriously discussed Ashley since their relationship years earlier. So he asked why she was suddenly bringing her up. His mom told him that Ashley's mother had contacted her. According to his mom, Ashley's mother had become worried because her daughter had recently started crying a lot and seemed extremely sad. Her mother confronted Ashley about what was happening. Ashley cried, and she confessed to her mother how much she missed him, how she still loved him, how she had been in love with him for years, and how she felt that things between them had never worked out despite how strongly she felt. Her mother didn't want to continue watching her daughter remain heartbroken. She wanted to know whether he was single and whether he might consider speaking to Ashley again. So she called his mom. The moment his mom told him what had happened, he knew it was done. He started dancing around the house. For years, he had tried to figure out how the situation could possibly be repaired. And the bridge had come through a conversation between their mothers. A conversation he never could have predicted. A conversation he never could have arranged. And there was another bizarre detail. About a week before this conversation with his mom, he had a strange dream involving both of their mothers talking and looking at him. Premonition. Maybe. Who knows? But the timing was absolutely crazy. The next day, their organization had its annual administrative meeting. Ashley and he were no longer young volunteers. They had grown into adults who helped manage parts of the organization. During the meeting, he wrote "Hi" on a sticky note and passed it to her. It was their first genuine interaction in a very long time. She smiled. She wrote "Hi" back and passed it to him. It was a tiny moment, but it felt as though years of tension had dissolved. That night, he called her. And finally, he told her the truth. He told her he still had feelings for her and wanted to make it work with her. She was overjoyed. During that conversation, she told him the things he had wanted to hear for years. She said she had repeatedly wanted to get back together. But throughout the years, she kept hearing through mutual friends that he was dating someone else or the other. Every time, she assumed he had moved on. And it broke her heart. Finally, they discussed everything honestly. They talked about the original breakup in 2020, the failed reconciliation in 2022, the fear on both sides, the years of poor timing, and the other relationships that had happened in between. Everything came full circle. And from that point forward, their relationship was completely different from the first time they dated. He was no longer the terrified man who could barely hold her hand. They communicated openly. They both felt secure. They were still a normal couple with normal disagreements and arguments, but there was genuine love, maturity, and commitment between them. And within about a year, he proposed, and they got married. They planned the wedding they had both dreamed of, surrounded by their families, friends, and community. It was large. It was beautiful. And it was more incredible than anything the insecure version of him entering his 20s in 2019 could ever have imagined. The woman he once felt too intimidated even to approach became his wife. But there was another part of the story he only learned later, and this makes the timing even crazier. Ashley told him that toward the end of 2023 and beginning of 2024, she had been in a long-distance relationship with another person. She didn't feel particularly good about him, but he had tried to move extremely fast. He told his family to bring a marriage proposal to Ashley's family after only about 2 months of them talking. Ashley was so heartbroken about love not working out for her that she reluctantly agreed. But right before she was going to tell her family about this guy, the truth came out. He was hiding a severe alcoholism problem. And he had been lying to her about several other things as well. She was furious with him and ended things immediately. And early 2024 was also when this man began his SATS anniversary scene. He had no idea any of this was happening. Crazy doesn't even begin to describe it. He later reflected on how wild it was that his unwillingness to make any sort of move himself had somehow led multiple other people to become naturally inspired to push him and Ashley toward one another. One of his favorite Bollywood movie quotes growing up was, "Kate Hain agar kisi cheese ko dil si chaho, to puri kainat us tums milling kai kashish main lag jati hai." It translates roughly to, they say that if you want something with all your heart, then the entire universe will begin to work together and conspire to bring you together with that thing. And he believes the Neville version would be something like this. If you embrace a dream with the absolute intensity of your soul and become one with the reality of its fulfillment, then the entire universe enters into a kind of sacred conspiracy. It transforms your every step into a bridge of incidents, a path that may wind through storms, but ultimately leads toward the desired destination. And this is where the deepest lesson of the entire story comes in. The main lesson he took from all of this wasn't that one manifestation technique is more powerful than another. A technique is simply a way of entering a state. His first scene worked. He imagined Sherry congratulating him because Ashley and he were dating. And that's exactly what happened. But that scene was being imagined by an insecure man who still believed he couldn't sustain the relationship. His final scene implied decades of marriage, deep love, restored friendships, emotional security, and an entirely different identity. The first time, he wanted Ashley to validate him, The final time, he occupied the identity of her husband. He also learned that he couldn't blame circumstances while claiming to be the creator of his experience. He could have blamed Ashley for ending the relationship. He could have blamed other men, their friends, family expectations, time, the pain of the past. But blaming, those things would have kept him in the state of someone powerless before them. And this doesn't mean he believes other people should be controlled, blamed, or denied their humanity. It simply means that within his own experience, he had to take responsibility for the assumptions, reactions, and identity he repeatedly brought into the relationship. There were several moments when the bridge brought Ashley directly to him, and he still reacted from the old state. Those moments didn't prove that the law had failed. They revealed exactly which version of himself he was still occupying. So when people ask, "How do I manifest a specific person?" he doesn't believe the most useful question is, "Which technique should I use?" The better question is, who are you in relation to this person? Are you someone waiting to be chosen? Someone watching for signs? Someone checking whether another person is gone? Someone hopping for a text because that text would finally make you feel secure? Or are you the person for whom a loving, mutual, secure relationship is already natural? He spent years trying to obtain a woman while still identifying as someone incapable of keeping her. Everything changed when he stopped trying to force the outer world and changed the person experiencing it. And this is also why he isn't sharing this story to suggest that anyone needs to wait 5 years. You never have to wait that long. Neville himself says the season is ripe now for harvest. You don't have to wait years like he did. Most of his delay came from his own fear, hesitation, insecurity, and failure to remain faithful to the end. The bridge brought them together more than once. He simply wasn't ready to receive what he said he wanted. But even after the breakup, the failed reconciliation, third parties, friend group drama, family pressure, years of separation, and circumstances that genuinely appeared impossible, the end still became real. He married the woman he once felt too insecure to even speak to. And when he looks back now, he realizes that the greatest manifestation wasn't simply getting his specific person. It was becoming the man who could finally receive her, love her, and build a life with her. And honestly, I think that is the part of this story worth sitting with. Because maybe the question isn't whether your person is too far away. Maybe it isn't whether the circumstances are too complicated. Maybe it isn't whether too much time has passed. Maybe it isn't whether there is another person involved. Maybe it isn't whether you've already failed once, twice, or 10 times. Maybe the real question is simply this: who are you being in the story you're telling yourself right now? Because this man spent years looking at Ashley as someone completely out of his league. He imagined getting her. He got her. And then he lost her because the version of himself who had imagined getting her wasn't yet the version of himself who knew how to keep, love, and sustain that relationship. The bridge kept bringing opportunities, and he kept meeting those opportunities as the old version of himself. It wasn't until he stopped obsessing over the middle and went all the way to the end that everything began to change. He stopped imagining the text. He stopped imagining the date. He stopped imagining the reconciliation. He stopped imagining the sign. He stopped trying to figure out how it would happen. Instead, he imagined something that made all of those questions irrelevant. 20 years from now, he was happily married to Ashley. Their friendships were restored. There was love. There was security. There was history. There was a life. And he occupied that reality from the inside. Then the bridge unfolded in ways he could never have planned. A friendship was repaired. Ashley became warmer. Their mothers had a conversation. Ashley admitted she still loved him. A completely unrelated relationship collapsed because of hidden circumstances he knew nothing about. And eventually, He and Ashley finally had the honest conversation they had been avoiding for years. He didn't control every person involved. He didn't map out every step. He didn't know how the bridge would work. He simply changed the end he was occupying. And eventually, the outer world caught up. So if you're listening to this right now and you're thinking, "But my circumstances look impossible," remember that this man's circumstances once looked impossible too. The woman he loved had rejected the possibility of them being together. They had already broken up. They had already failed to reconcile. Other people had entered their lives. Their friends had fallen out. Years had passed. He didn't even know her relationship status. And still, the story wasn't over. If anything, the part that looked like the ending was simply another part of the bridge. And perhaps that's the biggest takeaway from this entire story. Don't let a middle event convince you that you have reached the end. Don't take today's circumstances and use them as proof of tomorrow. Don't confuse a delay with a denial. And don't keep asking, "Where is it?" Instead, ask yourself, "Who would I be if this were already done?" Then become familiar with that person. Not by pretending. Not by desperately repeating words while checking the outside world every 5 minutes. But by entering the state. By imagining from the fulfilled reality. By allowing yourself to experience what it would feel natural to experience if the thing you wanted were already yours. Because the greatest manifestation in this story wasn't the wedding. It wasn't the relationship. It wasn't even Ashley. The greatest manifestation was the transformation of the man who once believed she was completely out of his league into the man who could stand beside her as her husband. And that is why sometimes the person you think you're trying to manifest isn't the only thing being created. You are being created too. You are becoming someone new. Someone who thinks differently. Someone who expects differently. Someone who responds differently. Someone who no longer sees the old circumstances as the final authority over their life. And maybe that is what living in the end really means. Not simply imagining that you have the thing, but becoming so familiar with the identity of the person who already has it that the old version of you eventually feels like someone you used to be. So if this story reached you at exactly the right time, remember this. You do not have to copy his 5-year timeline. You don't have to recreate his techniques word for word. You don't need his circumstances. You don't need his bridge. And you certainly don't need to know how everything will happen. What you need is to decide what the end looks like for you. Then stop making the middle your home. Because circumstances can change. People can change. Relationships can change. Your self-concept can change. And sometimes, the bridge to what you want can begin moving long before you can see where it's going. This story began with a man who couldn't even bring himself to admit that he liked the woman he loved because he believed she was completely out of his league. It went through a relationship, a breakup, another opportunity, another rejection, other relationships, years of separation, friendship drama, family pressure, and circumstances that looked impossible. And it ended with him marrying that same woman. Not because the journey was perfect. Not because he never doubted. Not because he never sabotaged himself. But because eventually, he stopped trying to manifest individual moments and became faithful to the end. And that is the story. The woman he once thought was completely out of his league became his wife. And the man who once believed he could never have her became the man capable of building a life with her. So let this be your reminder. The circumstances you're looking at right now are not necessarily the final chapter. You don't know what is happening behind the scenes. You don't know what conversations are taking place. You don't know what bridge of incidents is already forming. And you don't need to. Your job is not to control every step between where you are and where you want to be. Your job is to know where you're going. As Neville said, the season is ripe now for harvest. So stop asking whether it's possible. Stop asking whether it's too late. Stop asking whether the circumstances are too complicated. Stop asking how. Go to the end. Become familiar with the fulfilled reality. And let the bridge take care of the middle. Because sometimes the greatest manifestation isn't getting the person, the money, the relationship, the home, the career, or the dream. Sometimes the greatest manifestation is becoming the version of yourself for whom that reality is finally normal. Thank you for watching Real Life Manifestations. If this story gave you a new perspective on the law of assumption, self-concept, living in the end, or manifesting a specific person, don't just listen to the story and move on. Ask yourself what it revealed about the state you've been occupying. Ask yourself what version of you has been trying to create your desired reality. And most importantly, ask yourself what your life would feel like if the thing you're waiting for was already done. Because the point isn't to spend your entire life chasing manifestations. The point is to become so familiar with the reality you desire that you stop living as the person who is waiting for it. And if you needed this reminder today, take it with you. The bridge doesn't need to make sense to you for it to work. Your circumstances don't get the final word. Your past doesn't get the final word. Your current identity doesn't get the final word. You do. And until next time, remember, your imagination is not a place you visit to escape your reality. It is the place where you decide what your reality becomes. This is Real Life Manifestations. And I'll see you in the next one.